Hello, I'm Sam Collins, and I talk about small parts of racing cars.
Yeah. If you know.
Haha!
There you go.
Flipping eight, Max.
Yeah, been a while, man. How are you?
How are you, mate? How are you? How's life?
Good.
What are you doing now?
We got an offer we couldn't refuse. I'm just switching to to my earbuds. We got an offer we couldn't refuse on our websites back in like 15. So 15 was my
Yeah.
last Le Mans. And I got asked by Audi of America to get involved with their owners club here in the United States. So I
Yeah.
did that, took over the print magazine, took over the club itself, and then like Audi's kind of moved as things have contracted at the brands. They kind of stopped funding the club, and the club just kind of exists on its own. And it was like austerity measures, cutting staff, cutting office space,
Yeah.
whatever, and it was just getting burnout level. So I hired some pretty good people who were there to try and keep it going, and I kind of set out on my own to kind of. I'm in my 50s now, so I figured to tackle projects that I can things I want to do, and
Yeah,
club
that's
school
important. That's
was
important.
rewarding, I suppose, but it wasn't the projects I wanted to do. So
Yeah. Oh, cool.
yeah, how'd you? Well, I mean, that's all stuff I want to ask you in the podcast, but
Go for it. Yeah.
I'd love to know how we got from Le Mans to Formula One, and or if you were always there to begin with.
Yeah. Well, we can do that. I mean, let's do this.
All right, so last I saw you was probably 2015 Le Mans,
Yeah, I reckon so. You're sitting across the desk from me.
right? John's crew there in the media center. That was always a fun place to be.
There was a bar next to our desk. I seem to remember.
The
That was always handy.
The kind Michelin people who were willing to give us a stiff drink when we needed it.
Which was 24 hours of a race.
Right. Just pound that and Red Bull. Right.
Yeah,
Go into
exactly.
hit the paddock hospitality, get some Red Bull. Whatever.
Well, they tried to introduce their own energy drink that one year, and they put the fridges on the ends of our desks, and we had all that free energy drink. It wasn't a high quality product, I don't think, and it never really went on. But I remember feeling very unwell driving back to Rouen after the race or that had finished, and had to take a little bit of an unscheduled break in the hard shoulder to vacate my
Really
myself. Yeah, rather brightly coloured fluid.
I mean, it's tough, right? Like you're trying to get through that. For me, it was always I would hit that kind of period where everything was dark and probably around like I don't know 4 a.m. I'm trying to make it to like hit sunrise by Dunlop and get by the bridge and get John taught me to shoot up there because I could see their eyes through the helmet visors and everything else, and it was all pretty amazing. But I would hit that like run from 4 to 7 or 4 to I don't know whenever sunrise was 5 o'clock 6 o'clock. But there was just seemed like an hour or two where like man I'm on fumes, and then I was fine.
For me, it was always after dawn. I'd always do like a commentary stint around dawn, come off that, then I might go for a wander down the pit lane, see still surviving the race, look at the broken cars, look at those who are trying to fix the cars, take some pictures. And then once I got back upstairs, up into the media center above the pit lane, it was probably about 8 a.m., 9 a.m. And then from that point, that's where I started to struggle up until all the razzmatazz started around lunchtime. And then you still got another 3 hours to go after that.
Now, did you have a place you could go and crash, or are you one of the people who were under the desk in the media center?
I think I cuddled your feet one year underneath the desk.
Yeah. Do you remember? Did you ever know? I don't want to talk out of school. Well, it wouldn't be talking out of school. I think he did it for social media, if there wasn't even a thing back then. But Dan Neal, who's now with, I believe, Wall Street Journal. He's a U.S. journalist, and he was there with. Like Audi would do a hospitality group every year, and he was there with the journalist group I was on the one year, and they would give us this because they would give us they had that hospitality thing over at the hockey arena or whatever it was across the street.
Yeah.
And candidly, I was trying to sound strong. When you said you would crash about that time, I would kind of wander over there. I had a little cubicle over there, cot that I could sleep on. So I would typically. No,
I just had the floor.
Yeah. Well, Dan one time brought they gave us these dopey terry cloth. These like robes that you would wear to the shower there, and Dan was wearing it. I think in the media center, being Dan, but
I don't think they did used to give us when it looked like Audi was going to win. They'd go around the media center and give us all electric razors. So for the official pictures, and if we were in the background, we were all clean shaven and didn't look like a disheveled bunch of journalists, which is what we were.
Right. Okay, so for those listening to the podcast and don't yet know who you are, I want to talk about who you are. But then what I'm planning to ask you, and I'm happy to go wherever else, but obviously what's going on with Formula One this season. I do want to reminisce about Le Mans a bit. I'm curious about that. But also, you had told me a fascinating story once, and I'm remembering some details, not all. I live in Pennsylvania, and my mom grew up in Western Pennsylvania. I was out there all the time. So we had a conversation one of those late nights cuddling in the media center about a certain tunnel in Western Pennsylvania. So I'm curious about that one, too, if you're open to chatting about it.
Absolutely. It's up by Donegal in Pennsylvania. Ganassi's secret facility, which I ended up making not so secret, which upset
You're the one who broke it?
Yeah. There's obviously take credit, but no, it was me. Right. And I'll tell you a story how that happened, actually.
Okay.
The guy who invented it was a guy who's now sadly dead, called Paul van Valkenburg, who used to write columns for the magazine I was working for at the time. And he wrote this column maybe in like 1995, 1996, and I was looking through some old magazines to try and find something to write about. And he was talking about the ultimate aerodynamic test facility would not be a wind tunnel, it wouldn't be CFD, it wouldn't be a real-world racetrack because you get crosswinds. It would be an enclosed tunnel where you could drive a car up and down in perfectly repeatable conditions. And as a joke, the editor then drew a picture of the London Underground with a Formula One car going through it. And I thought that was great fun. All right. But then I thought, well, you know what? That's an old concept that somebody suggested. I'll write a new article based around that idea. I like that idea. It's quite fun. And yeah, let's see what you do. How could you build one of these? It'll fill a few pages. It's a nice, easy article that we can stick in when it's a quiet month or something. So I sort of set about doing it, phoned some people I knew in the industry, talked to RML, talked to a few other racing teams, spoke to some other people in the industry. And I sort of found somebody I used to talk to a lot back then who has to remain nameless, and phoned him up and said, look, I'm writing about this thing. If you built a tunnel and you drove cars through it, how would it actually work? And what would the functionality be? And how could you possibly design this? It's really just an idea. And he said, why are you asking me that? Well, that's a funny response. What do you know about it? You can't talk to me on this number about it. I'll call you back on your mobile. And I was like, okay. Mobile meaning cell to Americans.
Right.
And so a few minutes later, I get a phone call. It's like, how did you find out about this? Find out about
you just play dumb?
Yeah. No, I was just like, I haven't got a clue what you're talking about at this point.
Oh, no. I would have almost, what I was curious more was when you'd be like, yeah, well, I listened to the ground.
And then this guy realized that I hadn't got a clue, and I just sort of stumbled on this story. And I forget what year it was, but it was quite early on. It might have been like 2005, quite the early days of the tunnel. And he starts spilling the beans to me that actually Chip Ganassi Racing, working with Ben Bowlby, who I went on to work with quite a bit on other projects. Yeah, that was great. You were there in 2015. Right. And the tunnel was an old railway tunnel that had converted to a highway on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And then that got rerouted, and there was this abandoned tunnel. There's a whole series of them. There's a place called Laurel Hill, which is near Donegal, Pennsylvania. Right. And Chip Ganassi had acquired the tunnel somehow from the State Highways Department, or whatever it is called. And working with Bowlby had turned it into this perfect aerodynamic test facility where you drive a car through and it's all perfectly controlled conditions and perfectly repeatable. And they were using it for their IndyCar, NASCAR programs. And I think later ended up, Ford GT was used in there and some other cars ended up being used in there. There were rumors, which I don't think were true, of an F1 car being run there. And suddenly I'd stumbled on this story and then sat down in the office, had a chat with some of my colleagues. I mean, I've just discovered this weird thing. I mean, this is interesting, isn't it? Oh, we'll have to go and look into that. I'd found the location. And then this was very early days. I don't think it was even YouTube. I think it was the very early days of the internet. And I found some hikers writing on a blog about they'd found some weird tunnel which they thought they could walk through, but they couldn't. And when they were trying to walk through it, they heard all of these strange sounds of NASCAR engines, which is a very distinctive sound. If you ever wake up in the Wingate by Wyndham in Mooresville, North Carolina, that's the sound that wakes you up in the morning because you're near the dyno testing facilities. And they posted a video or a little clip. Really, you couldn't really see. It was like filmed with a pseudo potato, but you could hear the sound. It was like, that's a NASCAR engine. Why is there a NASCAR engine? And they'd taken some pictures. You could see NASCAR tires piled up outside. I think they were Hoosiers rather than Goodyears because you couldn't test on the Goodyears. And then I was like, that's funny. What's this facility all about? So doing some digging, turned out Ben Bowlby and Chip Ganassi had patented the whole thing. So we got hold.
Oh, some public record.
There's a public record if you know where to look. So we found the patent, and the patent referred back to the magazine that I was working for at the time. So all along, they admitted that it had been invented by the magazine I was working for. And then suddenly there's this full circle. So we wrote this whole article about it, how it worked, who was operating it, and just went into a few sort of different details about that we speculated on because nobody at Ganassi would talk to us. I asked Chip directly about it. I asked, I think Andy Brown was still there at the time. I asked him about it, and they would just be closed door. So we wrote the story about it, and it went into a NASCAR publication I was editing and the main magazine I was editing, so 2 different versions. And it sort of went around the motorsport community a bit at that point, but it didn't really get much traction until I wrote a version of that story online, which I think you can still find if you Google it. And it was a much lighter weight story. It didn't go into the technical details as much. And that story then started to get traction. I think it got picked up in Road and Track and a few other like bigger websites. And it's the one everybody refers back to, this one online story, but misses the 2 original print articles I did on it. And I think earlier this year or late last year, some journalist came in from the States, came up doing this whole big long interview on a big channel, YouTube channel, claiming how he discovered it and then saying that we didn't know what it was. And I was like, mate, come on. Your story was 3 years after mine. Come on, get rid of that. But yeah, what they were using was a highway tunnel converted to a motorsport testing facility. And it was like Area 51. It was so secret. The thing is, Ben Bowlby is English. And he'd got some mates like George Howard Chappell, who worked for the Aston Martin team and now work for Multimatic and do a lot of work with Ford. And they found an abandoned railway tunnel in England. And they've built another one just near Silverstone. Really? And there's a second one of these coast down tunnels or high-speed test tunnels at a place called Catesby. And this tunnel is publicly available. If you've got enough money, you can go and rent it out and test it. They used the Mazda DPI car as the test mule for it, which is fascinating. But the Ford GT Le Mans cars were tested in there primarily.
Interesting.
I have heard rumors of F1 cars in there, which I think might be true, but no one will say who because it would be against the regulations. But yeah, these secret tunnels underneath the ground that are being used to test race cars. And it's actually a really clever solution, a lot cheaper than a wind tunnel.
I guess it's like the air is really controlled and turntable at each end?
Turntable at each end, permanently climate controlled, humidity controlled. I think the one in Pennsylvania was less advanced than the one in the UK is now. I'm sure Ganassi have upgraded it a lot, but there was a court case with the Ganassi one about somebody who was forced to work in there and it wasn't properly ventilated and they got basically poisoned by the gases from the cars. There was a whole big legal court case, which I think you can look up. And that released a lot more information, but there used to be clouds that would form inside the tunnel in Pennsylvania because the humidity was so high and it wasn't as controlled. Whereas the one in the UK is like fully climate controlled. They've really managed the road surface. But the US one has a slight kink in it about halfway along. And that caught out one of
a turn?
Yeah, not quite a turn, but enough that you'd have to adjust your steering wheel. A bit like the Mulsanne kink or the Avis kink, something like that.
I'm trying to remember when you and I first worked together, if I'd done this yet or not when we spoke. But when I'm 54 now, and when I turned 40, I believe, my wife scheduled this for me because it looked rad. And it was 2 tunnels near the Breezewood exit of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. One is a 3/4 of a mile long tunnel, and one is 1.5 miles. Yeah. And they've kept a piece of the turnpike similar. I suspect it's probably the same line, meaning it was started out as a rail line, a competing rail line to the Pennsylvania Railroad. And as we were told when we went through with a guy who knew that property, he said it was basically the guy had started it to compete with the Pennsylvania Railroad, realized that was a really dumb idea because the Pennsylvania Railroad was right there, and then gave it to the state, or the state took it, or whatever, eminent domain. But that railways don't like to climb, but they can cut a tighter turn than a car. So what's good for a turnpike isn't necessarily good for a railway. And then also they were more narrow. However, the what we noticed when we went through we're at biking speed, right? So 10 to 20 miles per hour. What we were told, like with the 3/4 of a mile, you could see the other end when you entered it, and with the mile and a half, the way they had made it was like, I guess the 3/4 mile would have been like this too for drainage, right? It went slightly upgrade as you go into the tunnel, and then as you exit the halfway point, you start to go slight downgrade. So the water would go out that way naturally and drain out, and they wouldn't have water standing in the tunnel. But with a 3/4 mile, you couldn't see the opposite end. Sorry, with a mile and a half tunnel, you couldn't see the opposite end because the grade got high enough that it would block the view, right? So I wonder. That's why I asked if it was a turn or if it was more of a change in.
Oh yeah, no, it was a turn. It was a turn, and the reason I mention it is when they were testing one of the old Dallara Indy cars in there.
Yeah.
Now, I believe it was Darren Manning. You can look this up. I may have got it wrong. It might have been Dan Weldon. It was one of those two. They lost control of the car in the tunnel and wrote off a Dallara IndyCar car in that tunnel. They lost control, hit the wall, climbed up the wall a bit, I understand, and flipped the car and had a massive accident inside that tunnel. And yeah, so it's a bit hairy. But yeah, sure, the tunnels work well. It's more efficient. It's more repeatable. You've got a real engine running. We've got real brake ducts. It's a real car. It has all of the real elements. And if you go on the Catesby Tunnel website, you can actually see onboard cameras from the Mazda DPI just doing the aero test through the tunnel. It's fascinating. I've been meaning to make a video about the full story behind that, and I will do. It's just I want to get up to Catesby and do a bit better filming than just using archive footage.
So you're going to use the UK one versus the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure Ganassi will talk to me after I sort of outed the whole thing originally, but the UK tunnel, the guys are very... I actually went to that tunnel with them when they were constructing it, when it was still just a sort of very muddy, old, abandoned railway tunnel. And now it's this beautiful industrial park, high technology park with all sorts of motorsport facilities in there. So it's a really gorgeous facility. And I think they've turned the old railway station that was there into a tea room or something like that. It's you can go and check it out.
That is very cool. So did I catch what magazine you were writing for at the time?
That was Racecar Engineering at the time. I left them in 2017, something like that.
So if somebody really wants, super wonderfully in-depth, nerdy magazine. But if they want to catch the really in-depth version, that's pre-internet, so probably only exists in your local library or
you'd probably. There are they did have an online version of the magazine which you can go and buy and download. And if you Google, you might be able to find versions that are downloadable without buying it. But I don't know about that.
That's pretty rad, Sam. Thanks for sharing. I've always wanted to revisit that one with you. I think we were
no worries.
when we last discovered it or discussed it. Okay, well, so when I knew you from Le Mans, I assume you were doing, if you were with Racecar Engineering or whomever at that point, you were doing more than WEC or endurance.
I was doing that with Racecar Engineering. I was doing it actually by 2015. I was primarily doing it with Nissan actually. Okay. Because I was involved with Nismo TV.
Right.
And that was just about when we were starting the Super GT coverage. I think that started in 2013 or 2014 with Radio Le Mans, and then we sort of went off with Nismo TV and it became its whole own thing. So we were doing Super GT, we were doing all sorts of crazy videos. They had the Gamer to Racer challenge with Jan Mardenborough, Lucas Ordonez, people like that all won. That was all going on. They had the Delta Wing, the Zeord, and then the GTR.
The GTR LMP, the front wheel drive LMP one?
The weird one, yeah.
Well, all right. So engineering has always been that's one of the things I always loved about chatting with you in the media center is like you would dig into these details of the cars that I think a lot of people were just missing. I think I noticed one day turbofan looking things on the R18s and we were nerding out about that, but because they just popped up on the car, I think that year at Le Mans. Anyway, so if you're at Nissan at that time, that has to be fascinating between the Delta Wing, because I think that was all the same year or maybe back-to-back years.
It was back-to-back years. So they had the Delta Wing, which was quite a good success until it met a Toyota. And then there was a whole horrible argument the following year about who owned it. Was it Dom Panels? Was it Nissan? Was it RML? Right. All got very messy and controversial. And that, of course, was an Aston Martin chassis that they were using in that car.
In the Delta Wing?
In the Delta Wing, yeah. It was the Aston Martin. Remember the Aston Martin AMR1 disaster?
I do.
Yeah, that's the same chassis. And then those two...
Really?
The three, yeah. So the AMR1 chassis was used in that car, and then in the same year, the Pescarolo 03, I think it was called, which was designed by Nick Perrin, but it didn't work and had a terrible engine, so that didn't really work. And then another one was kept as a spare, and then one remained in a collector chassis, which is still in the collector chassis, I think. But that was the same Aston Martin AMR1, and the original Delta Wing is in the panels collection. There's a question mark about the Pescarolo one, which I think has now been turned back into an Aston Martin.
Okay.
And there is another one floating around that nobody really knows the identity of. So there were meant to be 6, and I don't know how many got built.
I think it was originally a proposal for. They had this. I remember one year, kind of like a wacky proposal contest or competition or something, as they were trying to drastically rethink. Was it IndyCar? And then
yes, that's how it started. 2012 IndyCar project. So the Delta Wing was one of the original proposals for IndyCar, so a single seat version of the Delta Wing. And then you had Dallara's proposal, and Dallara's original proposal was far more interesting than the DW12, or IR12 as it was originally known. And then you had proposals from Swift, from Bruce Ashmore Technology, which was a weird-looking design from some angles, but would have worked. I think the Swift proposal was brilliant. It was like the son of the Formula Nippon, and it was gorgeous.
Right.
And I think there were a couple of other weird ones that we didn't really get to see, but those were the proposals. But they went with Dallara, and it remained a one-make series. But it could have been a multi-chassis series with Delta Wings in it.
How cool would that have been?
It would have been amazing. And it made it. I mean, I still watch Indy 500 every year, but it's such a shadow of what it was. I mean,
but is that more watching for the race than it is for? I'm not trying to.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost a historic car race. I mean, I was watching a race today at Imola, and it was a bunch of old Le Mans prototypes from 2015, 2016, 2017. You had like Peugeot 908s in it, had Pescarolo 01s, Racecars. I was like, these aren't old cars. But this was a historic race, and I was thinking the IndyCar is from 2012. It's older than these historics that are in a historic race.
So the current IndyCar
is older as an origin. So it's still the Dallara. It's called whatever they want to call it. Yeah, they've whacked on an aeroscreen and glued some bits on and changed the engines around a bit, but it's still the same IndyCar at the base of it. So it really is just an ancient car. So sure, the Indy 500 is good racing. I really struggle, and I know a lot of people won't like this, but I really struggle with some of the road course racing because, you hear all these drivers at the moment, IndyCar drivers saying, it's so much better than F1. It's, they won't have to press a button to overtake. It's like, yeah, you do actually, but whatever. But it's also the racing the cars are really quite slow. I mean, they're slower than F2. They're slower than way slower than Super Formula, and F1 would
slower than F2.
Way slower. Yeah, they're slower than F2, way slower than Super Formula, and not even the same postcoders or zip coders as Formula One. So, and for me, because they've got rid of technical competition, really. Yeah, there's 2 different engine suppliers, but really it's just a one-make championship. It really leaves me cold. And yeah, while 500 is different, it's just I don't know, IndyCar just isn't cutting it for me. And my friend Will's going to be really annoyed at me about that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Unfortunately, I don't think many IndyCar people watch or listen to this podcast, but who knows? I guess I haven't watched IndyCar other than maybe catching the 500 in decades. So I'm completely saying this without any sort of context of what they're up against. But I think back on American Le Mans Series, what made that brilliant was its adoption of like rules with Le Mans, right?
Yeah, that was fantastic.
And I wonder, given IndyCar's open wheel, why, if you're saying it's slower than F2, why wouldn't they just like rule with one of the FIA open wheel series, F2 perhaps, and just simply run?
The issue to that is really simple to answer. IndyCar races on ovals, nobody else does. And so to build an oval car, you have to build them with slight different safety in there. There was originally a suggestion that Dallara were going to build one of the, I don't think it's the current generation, one of the late generation GP2 or one of the earlier generation F2 cars in a way that they could build it to run on ovals. And they were certainly going to build one of the generation, maybe it was about the 2008, 2009 generation of Formula 3 car to race on ovals as well, because they did start racing Formula 3 on the Euro Speedway oval. And that did start, and then it got shut down, and they didn't do it anymore. But the issue is you can't if you build a road course car, like a Formula 2 car, a Super Formula car, to meet oval racing safety standards, you just make the car a whole lot heavier. And if you're in Europe or Japan, you're not racing on ovals.
Right.
You're just carrying excess weight. So that's really the reason why not. But I think it still should be done. It'd be great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess which is the lesser evil, right? When you see a spec series, it's hard to get your head around it because there aren't a lot of manufacturers. It's more expensive to jump into, or they run a formula forever in comparison to say Formula One, or do you look at something like GT3, which is this sort of very approachable. They figured out a formula for that car where it's not just one spec. I mean, I guess GT3 rules spec, but that's it, right? It's open to a ton of manufacturers. Even from the Volkswagen Group at one time, you'd have like 4 different entries, right? Like Lamborghini, Bentley, Porsche, and Audi, right? So
that's because there's no regulations. There's no real regulation. The way GT3 works, and sadly now too many other series with balance of performance. GT3 was the first of these series, and it doesn't really have technical regulations. It has performance boxes. So you design a car to perform in a certain way, and if you fit within that performance box, they'll fiddle with your engine, your restrictors, your weights, all sorts of other things to make all of the cars basically perform in the same way. So you don't really have to engineer a car particularly hard. You've just got to build a car to be vaguely there or thereabouts, and the rules will sort out the rest. And for me, I think that's a real shame. I think balance of performance isn't a good way to regulate motor racing. Some of the greatest motor races I've watched have involved cars that were completely different, running to completely different rule books. I mean, if you think about Laguna Seca, the Porsche RS Spider battling the Audi R10, I mean, those races were astonishing. Right. I mean, out of your seat, some of the best motor racing in the world, because you had 2 completely different machines going wheel to wheel, banging fenders. It was fantastic. If you start introducing balance of performance, then you kind of make it all a bit artificial. And that's the problem with the current top class at Le Mans at the moment. It's a bit artificial. The fact they're refusing to even disclose balance of performance figures, I think, is a joke. You don't know the story of the race if you don't know maybe Ferrari's got a performance break this week, or Genesis, or whoever. And then you get into the situation that a lot of the cars aren't really what they say on the tin. I mean, is that a BMW or is it something else? I mean, is this Genesis a Genesis? Is that an Alpine? Right. No, they're both a Racers, just with some different bodywork on a different engine, and then performance balance to be the same. So what's the point?
So they're the US spec.
Yeah, they're like TPI basically now.
Right.
Yeah.
So they have to use one of 4. This is still 4 chassis manufacturers.
Yeah, that's right.
And a spec hybrid system.
Yeah. And you're just taking it away from, in my opinion, just taking it. I mean, the hypercars themselves, the Ferrari, the Peugeot to an extent, that sort of car, even the Isotta Franceschini, I can't even pronounce it, that crazy thing. And the, what was the American one called? It's brain fade on me, but really, the Glickenhaus car. Yeah, I loved cars like that. People have come up with something that's a bit odd, a bit quirky. Back in the days, it was welter racing and people like that. That, for me, is the real fabric of the sport. But when everybody's like so rule regulated, you can't develop the car, you can't lock things down. What if everybody's, the Le Mans 24 Hours now is a race of survival more than it's ever been, because the performance of the cars has been locked down before the race has even started, because the ACO and the FIA have said this is your balanced performance for the Le Mans 24 Hours, and that's it.
Even though then it's always the 24-hour sprint, as the commentators will say on Radio Le Mans, it's still a nutrition thing because they're all so close. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they're all so close, and it becomes more like a big, long F2 race. And back in the days when I met you, that was proper motor racing. Because, and particularly when you had Audi, Porsche, Toyota, and Peugeot at some points with completely different car designs, and then Nissan, who were all sort of racing in the same class and all, apart from Nissan, able to keep up with each other and battle super hard. I mean, that was furious motor racing.
Right.
I mean, Audi versus Peugeot as well. I mean, the American Le Mans series when Peugeots turned up, that was brilliant stuff.
Yeah.
You don't get that sort of battle. You don't get that sort of rivalry when it's all been decided by a balanced performance person sort of 2 weeks before the race.
And wasn't it like, I mean, gosh, the budgets then, but if you look at like the year, it was what, Porsche, Peugeot, and Audi. You had, or maybe it was Toyota, Porsche, and Audi. And you had one running, trying to remember which one was running. Was it batteries, and Porsche was running what was Porsche running in the 919? A four cylinder.
Porsche had a weird V4, sort of
Right.
proper old school Volkswagen style, which they initially didn't work very well, but then they sorted out. But that had a Formula One style motor generator
Capacitor.
unit. But no, that felt a battery, lithium-ion battery.
And the Toyota V8
had
capacitor.
A V8 engine, F1 derived essentially V8 engine with a capacitor pack, I think it was. And then you had Audi, which had a flywheel at some point.
A flybrid and a V6 TDI.
Yeah. And it was just completely different. And Peugeot's hybrid, which never raced, had a lithium-ion battery as well, which was a different configuration of TDI as well. Was
there a turbo on the Toyota?
No, that was naturally aspirated.
Right. So you had a Turbo 4.
Yeah.
Hybrid, and then a V8 naturally aspirated V8 hybrid, and a turbo diesel.
Yeah.
Hybrid.
And no balance of performance. On a Le Mans circuit, they were all basically within 2 or 3 seconds of one another. And when the race went on, they were battling hard between each other. It wasn't a foregone conclusion.
Right. Proper engineering battle with those years.
Proper engineering battle, but it was good to watch.
Right. Budgets to the moon, though.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not convinced by that, because I think had the Nissan been built properly, which it wasn't, they would have proven that you could build a car that was almost as quick. It would never have been as quick as the front runners, but it wouldn't have been far off if it had been built right, for probably a quarter or a tenth of the budget of the Audis and Toyotas. I mean, I don't think Toyota's budget was as big as people thought it was.
Okay.
That was very much an engineering driven project. Obviously Audi and Porsche had huge budgets.
What was crazy to me, the year they turned up with the 919, I remember they had a morning breakfast with Wolfgang Hotz, right? And Hotz had been head of development at Audi. Before that, Opel DTM, Ferrari. The dude was legit back, like, catalog of engineering. And he ends up taking the role at Porsche. And so I asked him specifically about, like, 919, like, what are you sharing? Because we didn't really know much, right? The first year the car turned up. And he's like, I'm sharing some of the staff. And I'm not sharing, I hired them away. Otherwise, car is completely different from the R18. Yeah. And that year they had, like, remember the signs on the front straight? Like, they had, like, home of Quattro, and it was like, home is where the heart is. Like, the Porsche and Porsche and the Audi marketing people were screwing with each other, right? Like, the rivalry was so amazing.
Fun. Yeah, it was great, but it was fun as well. It was a friendly rivalry, but bitterly full.
Right. Yeah.
Like the rivalry between Peugeot and Audi, that wasn't friendly.
No. That was more hardcore.
Yeah.
But I remember, like, the GT1, the last days of GT1, right, when it was Corvette and Aston Martin, and they would, like, even their mechanics would, like, race up the front straight for the start, like, pushing the cars faster. Like, they I don't know, the rivalry was just a fantastic thing to watch.
And then they'd all go to the pub afterwards. That's the thing that people didn't see. They'd all go to the Irish bar in the middle of Le Mans together and have a drink, because that was really brutally fought rivalry on track, but everybody was friendly. And that was just the way it should be. And even then, GT1 had a sort of balance of performance, but not like it is now.
Yeah.
And that still worked quite nicely. And when GT1 brought in the full balance of performance, which you saw in the GT1 World Championship, when you had the Ford GT, which is a gorgeous car, the Nissan GTR, the Lamborghini, and I think a Saleen turned up that then got banned. That kind of killed the class, because the cars weren't really built for endurance racing. They broke down a lot. I mean, I think forget what year it was, 2010, there were 8 cars in GT1 and only 2 finished. And they were both behind the GT2 leaders. So it was a bit like, oh, this class has kind of died.
Yeah.
But again, I think that class was killed by balance of performance.
Might have been. So there are always different levels, right? I guess balance of performance. And it wasn't really called that. But I think about it, you mentioned the RS Spider, and with that that would have been R10, right? Battles.
Yeah.
And
late R8, I think. The last of the R8s took on, because they crossed over 2006. For a little bit. Yeah, and the first Penske Spiders appeared in 2006, and then the Acuras or the Hondas joined them in 2007.
And Sebring after Sebring, the R10s went away, and they ran the R8s until. Yeah, I remember. That's it. I was at Lime Rock that year when Nick Nish won the last R8 race, and Yeah, it was a phenomenal battle. He was
That
clearly
really was.
like the RS Spider was clearly faster, so that he
Yeah.
was able to pull it off. But no, I think what was amazing in the ALMS was Don would just kind of let them go, right? Whereas it seemed like, at least the way the old salts like John would tell me about it when I was in Le Mans, it was like the ACO will never let LMP2 beat
No.
LMP1. That's not the show. So I think that was John that told me that. I don't want to correct, you know, but whatever. And I think that's what was. I was obviously working or winning around Audi so much that I would be rooting for them all the time. But there was something I thought that was just so cool about Porsche showing up with a lighter car, smaller engine. It was just so utterly Porsche and their heritage at Le Mans, and to be able to fight for an all-out win just seemed like, why would you not let them go? I could see where Audi wouldn't want them to do it, but what a great show that would have been.
Yeah, because back then the RS Spider was essentially banned from Le Mans. They couldn't bring the Penske Spiders at all, and it wasn't until that
Muscle
Dutch,
Milk,
I think Dutch team, Van Merkstein.
Uh,
I know they turned up with an RS Spider. The only reason I know that is I found a picture of it at Le Mans covered in mud. So the driver had obviously had an off when they came into a pitch. So I took a picture of it and it's covered in mud. And I was like, okay, you've had a moment.
Yeah.
Did Muscle Milk run their car in Le Mans?
I thought Muscle Milk ran the car the 1 year. One
They
year
might
I was
have
there.
done. There was a blue one as well, and I can't remember who ran that.
I don't recall.
But again, that car never got to. It's like the Ferrari 333. Never really got to show what it could do in Le Mans because it was really aimed at the US market. But I think it was a bit of a shame we never got to see that unleashed in Europe with Penske and Pro Team running it.
Had Penske brought that car to Le Mans and the ACO would have been game to it, I think he would have been a player.
Yeah, I think so too. And that was and the reason is that the ACO said LMP2 was wasn't a class for manufacturers. It was a class for privateer teams.
Right.
But I always sort of thought, well, that's not really true because you've got Alpine with a completely works team in LMP2. Yes, they're running an Racecars, but that is a full Alpine works team. And you've even let them change the name of the car on the garage door to Alpine A450, I think it was.
Right.
That's not right. You can't ban one team for being a works team and then have a works team just because they're French. That, I thought was unfair.
I feel like that would have been, in retrospect, right? You see the way GT3 went over the years, or GT in general, and Le Mans, having perhaps like a Pro-Am factory team, like a winner and a non-factory team winner in LMP2 might have helped it, because eventually that class just became a spec series too.
And that's a shame. That LMP2, I think, got completely killed by a poor decision to switch to those 4 manufacturer chassis. But one of those chassis, the Riley, was really only designed to build the Mazda and wasn't really a serious LMP2 project. I mean, yes, they tried, but they were based in Mooresville, North Carolina. Europeans are not going to buy that car. It's too far away. So they didn't really, I think they only made 2 or 3 of those that weren't Mazdas. The Mazdas were great. And I think it's a real shame that the DPI cars weren't allowed to come to Le Mans because of the same reason.
Right.
Because I think they should have been able to race as LMP2s. And I think that would have been quite entertaining. And then you had the spec engine in LMP2, which the changes to LMP2 I'm talking about, and I forget the year it happened. It might have been like 2014, 2013, something like that. So all of the cars had to be built by one of 4 manufacturers, which was Riley Technologies, Ligier, Racecars, and I forget the other one. It was Dallara, of course. Dallara, because it was the same manufacturers as DPI. But then they all in LMP2 had to use an identical Gibson-built engine. And I thought that was a shame because prior to those changes, LMP2 had the weird Russian thing, the SMP, which Dallara was heavily involved with. You had the Dome. You had about 4. You had Welter Racing. You had Pillbeam, a bunch of other manufacturers building cars, Lucchini. And you didn't have to use the same engine. So there were Nissan-branded engines. There were BMWs. There were all sorts of other things going on in that class, Judds. And it was great racing. If you go back to those years before the limitation on chassis, and bear in mind, LMP2 didn't have balance of performance, the racing was incredibly close. I remember watching the race, and you could hear the LMP2 class coming after the first hour of the race. You'd have like the LMP1s battling, a few GTs scattered in. Then you just hear this noise, like this insane herd of bumblebees coming towards you. And then 20 LMP2 cars would go past in a lump, and there'd be like 6 different manufacturers, different gearboxes, different engines. And it was fantastic, really close racing. You never quite knew who was going to win. And now what we've got is a hypercar class where the LMDHs aren't really much quicker than the LMP2 cars we're getting at the end of that era. So I think we've gone a bit backwards in that class now.
Do you think that's why? I'm going to ask probably maybe some dumb questions because I'm not watching Le Mans as closely now. But it seems to me the LMDHs, as you just alluded to, aren't as fast. Do you think that's why? Didn't Porsche pull out of the racing in the US still with 963? But
I don't know why Porsche pulled out, actually. I haven't looked into that one. It frustrates me hearing the Porsche 963 being called a Porsche 963 because it's a Multimatic chassis. So yes, it's a gorgeous car, the 963, but you can convert it to anybody else's car that uses the Multimatic chassis. Right. So is that truly a Porsche? In my opinion, it's a Porsche bodied and Porsche powered car by somebody else. Now you get into the whole argument about the WSC95. Is that a Porsche? Is it TWR? Is it Jaguar? Well, but I think that car's a bit different. That was a one-off example. Maybe
you'll differentiate just because who was doing the design. But I mean, Dallara supplied the chassis for Audi, and it's LMP1.
Yeah, but Dallara supplied the chassis for Audi, but it was an Audi commission. Those cars were specifically designed and built to become Audi. So while Dallara was the manufacturer of the carbon fiber bits, it's still an Audi.
Does anybody else run Multimatic in?
Yes. And I can't remember off the top of my head. People will be shouting at the screen saying,
"No." I know Audi was looking at it, right? That was the original plan. Was they would share
There's one of the monocoques in somewhere in their storeroom. It's in the background of some random video about the Dakar. You can pick out the Audi monocoque sitting up on a shelf. It's like, oh, you got that far along with it. So, but yeah, that car, I think it's a real shame we didn't get to see it. But it was Formula One that killed that project. Mind, because the Formula One car they've turned up with this year is brilliant.
Is
from a technical point of view? Well, it's not. Its results aren't brilliant, but to look at, it's gorgeous.
Okay, so I want to move to Formula One, but before we do, can you tell me how you moved to Formula One? Because this year,
that's where I started. Is it where you Formula One? Yeah. So when I was a teenager, I found myself. They have a thing in England. It's like I think today they'd call it internships, but back then they had a different name for it. And I found myself like living in a room that was once rented out by, I think, Ayrton Senna, in a weird Oxfordshire village called Wantage or Grove. I think it was Grove. And I'd walk each morning to the Williams factory and sit down and set to work in the loom shop, which is where they made the wiring for the cars in 1997. And I was making bits for Jacques Villeneuve and Heinz-Harald Frenzen's cars and Jean-Christophe Bouillon, who's the test driver. And I was just walking around like, oh my God, like looking at these cars in pieces that were normally secrets of secrets. And I was a teenager. Like, I hadn't finished school at this point.
Wow.
So I was just really lucky to get that. And so I was like, yeah, I want to be in Formula One. I already kind of knew that. I grew up in a place called Crystal Palace. And there's a famous old motor racing circuit that's now abandoned up there. And that just always inspired me to just want to be involved. And I love machines and stuff, trains, planes, whatever, not so much boats.
So it was abandoned. What's the circuit? Was it abandoned when you were a kid?
Yeah, it was abandoned. It was like a playground, essentially. It was just in the public park. It was just the roadways around the park in the end. There was still a few little signs if you knew what to look for, but not really. Right. It was there was no motor racing hadn't been there since the 70s. I did bring it back briefly for a few years. I was involved in bringing it back. Well, I was responsible for it coming back for a few years, but then sort of, I guess I kind of got bored of it and moved away from the area, and it's kind of gone away again. And I think they're about to build on the track, which is a real shame. But
it is.
Yeah, they're sort of going to demolish it completely, which is a problem. But it is what it is. I'm not in London anymore, so it's not really for me. But yeah, so I was always inspired by that. Then went and did this at Williams, and then they advised me to go to a particular college in South London, miles from where I grew up. But by that point, I was 17. I'd got my first car, Mark II Golf, 1300 engine, tricked it out to take on like road rallies and
love that,
and do like night rallying and auto testing and stuff like that. So it was my competition car as well as my car I drove to college every day, and it was constantly breaking. So I was have to fix it and
What a great thing about a Golf, though.
It was great. It was lovely to have a Golf. There's the proper car. All my friends had 205s, and my Golf, while it wasn't as quick, it would just keep going, and theirs would break. And Yeah, when I was at college, I built my first race car, which was a Ford Fiesta Group N car. Raced that a little bit. Then went off to university, study engineering, and I think even before I went to university, I started racing single seaters, Volkswagen powered cars, Formula V's.
Right.
That was a brilliant time. Because that series was open engineering.
Yes.
So you could develop you had certain components you had to use, like the Volkswagen Flat 4, the Beetle transmission. But used the Volkswagen Flat 4, I mean, you could change the pistons, the crankshaft, the valves, the camshafts, everything. But you still had to use the block. But you could still machine the block about a bit as well. So there was a lot of fun with the engines. Then the chassis regulations were basically, you got to have a chassis and some bodywork. And you weren't allowed wings. Wings were illegal. Right. So you'd come up with all these clever little tweaks to try and find a bit of downforce or to reduce drag. I was always big on forget the downforce, reduce drag. Let's go to Silverstone. It's a high-speed circuit, and we'll just drive faster in straight lines than everybody else. Got to the point where I was putting the car in a wind tunnel and testing it, and and we did wind tunnel testing on the car, straight line testing. It was great fun, and there was proper engineering battles going on there. You'd have 60 or 70 cars on the entry list for most races, and they'd have to have heats and finals. Really great fun. And I didn't realize at that point I massively enjoyed the engineering of the car more than the driving of it. And so I started to drive other people's cars a little bit to see what they'd do, and it was quite good fun. And my first mechanic in that Formula V series, is why I'm telling you the story in a roundabout way, was I was racing at Silverstone. It was the first time I'd raced at Silverstone. It was the first time I'd raced a single seater, or open wheeler as you'd call it in the States. And to get from the garages, we weren't allowed to drive out of the front of the garage for some bureaucratic reason. So we had to drive back into the paddock and then drive round to the holding area, the pre-start grid. But I didn't really know where this was. So someone just told me, it's near the medical centre, which I did know. So I drove to where I thought the entrance to the medical centre was. And fortunately, at that point, I'd never been to the medical centre. I'd just seen it in passing. Right. So it turned out I actually drove to the exit gate of the circuit and reached the gate to drive out onto the public road and was told very firmly I'd gone the wrong way. So I was a little bit lost. So I turned around, went back over these bridges, driving down the public road that's in the middle of the track with normal road cars driving around. Everyone's like, why is there a race car driving around here? Eventually got waved to where I should be, pulled in like a bit all fussed and in a bit of a fluster, not really sure where I was supposed to be going and a bit wound up. And I sort of pull in, put into my place on the pre-grid, and I'm like, what do I do now? And then this girl who I'd never seen comes over to me and starts fiddling with my seatbelts and shouting at me that I'd got my seatbelts wrong, which I had, and just having this massive go at me. And I'm like, what on earth? And she's like, I'm meant to be your mechanic. Where are you? Why have you not been here? You left the garage like 5 minutes ago. You nearly missed the start. Was absolutely laying into me. And that's how I met Lena Gade.
No kidding.
It was her first race as well. She'd never done motor racing before, and she'd been assigned to me. I'd never met her, never knew anything about her. And that's how I got to know her. And then she got her experience basically mechanicking on my Formula V, which was probably a good start for her. But yeah.
And she ends up at, I forget which year I first noticed her at Audi. I think R15 era.
She was definitely. I don't think she was there in the R8 era. So this would have been about, the Formula V's would have been about 2007, 2008 maybe. No, it might have been earlier than. No, it was earlier than that actually. No, it was much earlier than that because I had Autosport branding on the car. So maybe it was like 2004, 2005.
No, all right. So early R8 days.
But she'd won anywhere near Audi at that point. She worked for BMW after that. Because she came from the mass production car industry, wanted to get into motorsport, and this was her route to fiddle on my car.
Just kind of messing around on
She quickly outgrew my Formula V, put it that way.
Boy, Formula V is such an interesting thing. I'll still see them for sale in like the local Facebook marketplace, and it's. I mean, I'm sure you can run them in Classic Series or whatever here in the US.
There's still a really quite buoyant, like current Formula V series in the US. I think they call it Formula First sometimes. Okay, but it is still there.
Like having worked around Volkswagen Group for so many years, and they're constantly looking for new ways to. Well, nowadays maybe less so with less budgets, but constantly looking for new ways to sort of engage new technology. To have some sort of like open spec, easily serviceable something that could revisit Formula V spiritually. I know it would be ruined by marketing people who just want it to be like whatever the current car they have to push is, but like it was really a brilliant, like, I don't know, just environment, right? Like everything about that model worked, and
it was a wonderful accident because the reason they started it was to promote their current model. It's just their current models happen to be a Volkswagen Beetle.
right.
So they used the bits of the Volkswagen Beetle, and you've got to go and race that, but you can build your own cars. So they commissioned Porsche of Salzburg to build a car, which was never officially called a Porsche, but it was called an Ostro. So an Ostroval, and that was actually built by Porsche Austria. And obviously that's when there was a bit of a falling out over the 917s about. So to train the engineers and mechanics to get ready for the long-tail 917 in sort of 66, 67, they built the Ostrovals. So that was the first Austrian Salzburg-built Porsche race cars. And then obviously there was the famous battles that went on into the early 70s with the 917s and other cars.
Right.
So they started off with that. I actually ended up owning one of those, which was owned by a racing driver called Brian Henton, who made it to Formula One many years later. But I didn't realize I'd actually ended up with this old car. Being me, I'd managed to find that car, and then somebody actually gave me a car called a Beach 5C because their wife had told them to kick out that old wreckage of a car out of their garage. Got a phone call because you want to come and look at this car, and I was like, yes. Do you want it? I haven't got any money, and when I say I hadn't got any money, I was scraping around to like get petrol to go in the car at that point.
Right.
And I was like, yes. Sort of managed to get the bits, cobbled it together, took it home. Looked around, looked up the history, managed to sell it off, take some bits off it for my car because I couldn't afford the new parts, and then sold off the chassis and some other bits to someone else, and that paid for me to do 2 more races. But it turned out that car was in a wreck because it crashed into my car in sort of the 1980s, and both cars had been in wrecks ever since. So I'd ended up with I'd basically bought this wreckage from an accident at Brands Hatch in the 80s and ended up rebuilding both. And I think both are still in action. Well, the Ostro, which I wish I'd never sold, but I hadn't got any money, so I really needed money, so I had to sell the race car.
Right.
That raced for a while in the historic series, but I now think is in a private collection somewhere. And I know who owns it, but I really wish I didn't sell it because it's worth a lot more than I sold it for. And then the Beach, I think, sold to somebody in the States and is back racing, so that's still around as well. So there's still these 2 cars, and they both look amazing. But I own neither anymore. That
these series still plug away because there are people who love them, right? I think speaks to the staying power of it. And it just seems like a lost opportunity. I don't know that the mindset at Volkswagen marketing, or Volkswagen, when I say Volkswagen, I just mean Volkswagen Group in general, like, Porsche may be accepted, is really there to really do such a thought, like to really thoughtfully reapproach the model, because I think you couldn't just say, okay, let's just take bits from whatever the latest, whatever they're even trying to push, ID3s, like I'm not sure. Which might be interesting if they tried to make it electric, but that's a whole other ball of wax that I don't.
I think that would be fun. I think if you came up with a sort of sealed electric powertrain package and then gave some freedom of car design. But the problem with car manufacturers now is they'd want the cars to be carbon fiber monocoques. They'd want front and rear impact structures. They want them to be crash tested and homologated. They'd want halo or even aero screen. And then suddenly when you're getting into that zones, you're already in 150, 200,000 pounds mark, because those cars and it stops becoming affordable for the small constructor.
Right.
And I think that's what's gone away. That's why I really enjoyed the Super GT, GT300 mother chassis regulations, because the Japanese recognize that problem, that if you've got to build a car that meets these safety standards, it's beyond the ability for the small constructor to build a car like that.
Right.
So their idea was to build a single monocoque and then go say, look, we've built you the safety bit, but the rest of it's up to you. Go have at it. And
is that the one that
cars.
Is that the one that they, I think at the very end of DTM before GT3 arrives, they were looking at adopting that spec chassis from Super GT?
No, that was a different chassis.
Was it?
That was a very similar concept. So DTM in 2012, DTM introduced a one-make chassis with carbon fiber bottom bit and steel frame on the top. Super GT adopted a version of that chassis made in Japan and slightly improved. And then the two series ran to roughly the same technical regulations called Class 1. But the Germans essentially bottled it. So Audi and Mercedes and BMW essentially all bottled it because the Japanese cars were so much faster. Because the Japanese did aerodynamic development, which the DTM didn't. The Japanese allowed limited engine development, which the DTM didn't. And Super GT at the time, GT500, was a tyre war. And it was a spec tyre in DTM. So the DTM cars really weren't a match for the GT500 cars. Okay. So when they did the Dream Race, I think in 2017, they really had to slow down the Super GT cars for there to be any sort of battle. But I think that was the problem with DTM. DTM was a motor racing championship run by the various marketing departments who insisted that they all had to have a chance of winning a race and they all had to win a race every year, which meant some of the results, I think, in DTM around that time were maybe a little bit contrived, perhaps.
Sure.
The cars were amazing. They sounded great and the racing was good on track. But I think sometimes it felt a bit odd when you looked at the lap times of different cars. You're like, hang on, how is that a second a lap quicker than that? They're identical and they both got professional drivers in.
It kind of goes to, maybe it's our level of acceptance. I remember, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was Beretsky who told me this one. But we were chatting one day and he was like, it's just, he older gentleman, right? Older German gentleman who remembers racing back in those days.
He was very Austrian. He was Austrian.
I'm so sorry then. Yeah.
He's proudly Austrian.
And what an amazing legend too. I would hate to ever offend him. But he was telling me it's just like the level of acceptance for danger now just isn't there to what it was. You look at the crazy pre-war stuff with like no seatbelts, the tires were terrible. Canvas was about the closest you got to a helmet. And then you move forward, right, to where we are today with you can have these massive accidents and people effectively walk away. But to me, kind of going back to what was great you talked about the science fair of LMP1 and how they were so different. That's one of the things I really thought was magical about like the BTCC in like the mid 90s, right? When you had like the Audi Quattros running the 4-cylinder 16 valve sequential, and you had the BMWs, rear wheel drive, manual transmission. You had, like just everybody kind of trying whatever they had. And these cars that anybody could get in and drive a car. I mean, the B5A4 had been, I'm sure they all had been FIA crash tested, but like it still looked like the B5A4 you could buy at the dealership on Monday. And so something those late DTM cars just couldn't say, right? It didn't really, yes, it was an RS5, it kind of shaped like one, but it was a silhouette car.
Yeah, they were pure silhouettes but from 2012 onwards. I mean, the old ITC cars were a bit more production based, and I loved those cars, but they were just insane. The BTCC now, though, is still like its current regulations called NGTC or TC2. I think that's a really nice rule book. So it does allow you to go to the organisers and buy a chassis package, but you still have to build it around a production car shell, which you do retain quite a lot of. Then you've got a freedom of whether you want to build your own engine or use use the engine from the production car, and you have a choice. So some take the production car engine, some you build their own. So I think the Hondas are always Neil Brown Hondas. I'm a bit out of touch with that series, but the racing in that series is fantastic. The grids have always been pretty damn good. It's not a professional championship anymore, and they will insist that they are. But when you look at who's racing in it, and this is not to the detriment of the series, it means the racing is really good. The teams running it are not sort of, AAA has become something else, but you're not seeing the big super teams like RML running right at the front and big teams like that. It's smaller teams. I mean, there's one not far from here from where I live. But they're smaller teams. They're developing the cars themselves. But you know what? It's better for that. It's like the top level of amateur motorsport in the world, I think, because there are very few, if any, I haven't looked at this year's entry list, but there's very few professional racing drivers. Almost all of the drivers in the series have another job. And that, I think, makes for really unpredictable and slightly wild racing. And you've still got a whole range of manufacturers in there. And these aren't silhouette cars. These are the production cars. So, it's still a really cracking racing series.
I'm sure it's fantastic. I guess where I go with it is you seem to not you, but like racing in general seems to reach a kind of like whatever, where when you have open formula, the formula is open to develop how you want and to allow for great racing. But then on top of that, when you have manufacturers getting involved or entities, race teams, like, again, looking at Audi in those days, Opt Sportsline, that put it in today's context, and Opt has a huge social media following. Like, you start to get marketing coming in that allows for a much greater visibility on the series, that like some of these great little series that won't draw much of a crowd will. Once you have that and you have sponsors, and then I guess it's an ebb and flow thing, right? Once all the marketing dollars come in, then that makes it infinitely more complicated and whatever else. But
it's a management thing. The American Le Mans series is a great case study, and I'm sure people in future probably about now actually need to be writing like very doctoral thesis papers about it and how that started and what went wrong. Because the American Le Mans series started and it grew out of sort of what had been Grand Am, and Grand Am was going off and doing NASCAR's thing, but it grew out of wanting to race modern sports racing cars on some of America's best circuits, and it exploded. It was great. It was the right thing at the right time. The manufacturers got involved and it absolutely exploded. I think the 2007, 2008 seasons were some of the finest motor racing. But then very quickly at the end of that, it imploded. And the series almost collapsed, and that's how you ended up getting to the unification and what we now have.
No.
But I actually think if they'd managed it slightly differently around 2008, yes, the popularity was exploding. Yes, this was fantastic racing, but the economy, the world economy, was in a bad place.
Totally,
and they didn't protect themselves against it. And I think now when you see what's happening in Formula One, which is now very much becoming a manufacturer championship rather than a privateer championship,
right?
People ask me all the time, like particularly this year, if I could change something about Formula One, what would it be? And actually, it wouldn't be a technical regulation. And I've said it, and I've got no fear saying this, because I've said it on air repeatedly, and it won't come as a surprise to anybody. More teams, more cars. I just want to see more teams and more cars in Formula One. I mean, yes, we had a new team start this year, and it's fantastic to see Cadillac in there. Right. And I think they're doing a brilliant job as a startup team. But I'd like to see 2 or 3 more teams. And I know that wouldn't fit, but bring back pre-qualifying. And that's slightly selfish for me because it makes my job a lot easier when you have more cars. So if you had 15 teams, that's 15 different designs to talk about. So it's, that's easier than having, there's plenty of things to talk about.
So would pre-qualifying work, or that's kind of what I was secretly thinking as I asked you about IndyCar a while back, which is, were IndyCar to go the American Le Mans formula and just say, let's go Formula One specifications and run U.S. road courses except for maybe Indy, right? Or maybe run the Indy road course, whatever. I don't know. This is probably sacrilege to an IndyCar person, but where I'm going with that is running a second set of teams, perhaps in another league, and then what was great about Le Mans was they all kind of showed up, and you had a track big enough to support those teams showing up, and it was kind of like a throwdown between then almost like a world championship at that point in that race, and I guess that's where would it bring more teams in, that if a U.S. team, say Cadillac, came into an IndyCar series at F1 spec and like really kicked ass, and then came over and ran in Formula One. I don't know. Nobody wants to be second fiddle. And I think that was one of the most amazing things that Don did, was like, I don't mind. I'm going to ride the coattails of Le Mans and their formula because it works, and bring it to great American tracks. And I don't mind riding shotgun with Le Mans. Like, we'll do that to make a series that really works.
Well, I think that would be exactly right. And again, something I can say that I would change if I was in charge, but fortunately, probably for everybody, I'm not, and Stefano is, which is a great thing. Right. I would have regional F1. So you would have F1 Americas, if you like.
Right.
So North and South America together as one. The F1 Americas Championship, where you'd have teams maybe using a year-old car, or develop their own car if they had the budget, and they would race on the circuits in those countries. But when F1, the World Championship, came to those races, so Miami or Interlagos, whichever circuit it is, Montreal, those teams, even Las Vegas, the teams who are competing in the Americas Championship would have a chance to qualify for the main show. So that, and you'd probably leave a couple of slots on the grid, 3 or 4 slots on the grid for wild card entries. So the top entries from the Americas Championship would get to have a crack at if they could get within 107% and the drivers had enough super license points, whatever, they could get on the grid for the main show and try and score some World Championship points, try and score a bit of a result. I mean, they're not going to win the championship, but if they're showing up sort of 5 or 6 times a year in the Americas, that gives an extra element to fan appeal. And you have F1 Asia's championship. So, you search up in China and Japan, they would have a competition. And these series would replace, in my opinion, F2. They would replace... Well, F2 might become something separate, but they would replace IndyCar. And so IndyCar could become the F1 Americas Championship. So the top IndyCar team, so Penske or whoever, might be able to try and get a driver onto the grid for the main show at Las Vegas or whatever. Or you might get a Honda-backed team like Dome or somebody like that getting on the grid for the Japanese Grand Prix with a local... if you look at the number of really talented Japanese or American, and when I say American, I mean North and South America as continents, drivers who really would have a decent crack in F1, but there's not enough teams and not enough seats. And I think if you had more seats, more cars, and a chance that these drivers, a few wildcard slots on the grid, and you could have European Championship, same thing, you'd actually get a weird appeal of these funny little teams coming in maybe for a few races and just having a chance to go in. And that would be a brilliant chance for these teams to generate a bit more sponsorship, a bit more funding, the drivers to show what they can do. And they still have to meet all the technical regulations and sport regulations at the same time. But I think they could really boost themselves in. And then you've got teams that might be struggling at the bottom of the field. And if they couldn't get in, you might have a relegation and promotion scheme to be on the World Championship.
Like UK soccer.
Exactly. Like UK soccer.
Sorry, football.
Football, exactly. And you could have something like that. And it'd be like some of the minor league teams coming and playing in the major leagues. And there is sport that has this. So if you watch the Tour de France every year, which I do, I really love watching cycling, is every year the Tour de France invites some teams from the lower UCI Tour to come and contest the Tour de France. And these are small teams without the budgets of the big sort of super teams at the front, and they have lower tier riders, and it's their big chance to show what they can do on the world stage. And I think it always adds something. So when you watch the Tour de France, there's a bunch of these guys coming in that you've never seen before because you don't watch that lower tier racing. But then suddenly, who's this? It's quite good. And in F1, you'd go back to when you had Mackeys trying to qualify for Grand Prix at Fuji Speedway, the mythical fastest lap at the 1976 Japanese Grand Prix, run by a rarely run privateer car. It added something to the sport. And so for me, the biggest change I would make to Formula One is more cars. But of course, there's practicalities, which means it might not work.
If you added promotion and demotion from those regional series and the demotion of the backmarker team or two from Formula One, I mean, I don't know how that works with like revenue sharing, etc., and that probably makes it infinitely more complicated.
I think the answer to that is quite simple. If you are a full-time registered World Championship competitor, you basically can't get relegated. And then you're entitled to the revenue sharing. And that's the top 10 teams. But then you've got manufacturer teams who are committed because of the Concord Agreement, and pretty much all of the teams now are manufacturer-backed, with I think the exception of Williams, and that's about it, really. And Haas, of course. Well, they are manufacturer-backed now, aren't they? So, it's just the exception of Williams. And McLaren, which it's sort of a manufacturer anyway.
Right.
Those World Championship teams can't get relegated. They're locked in. They're on the Concord Agreement. They get their money regardless of what the wildcard teams would do. So a wildcard team could come in. So Toyota could perhaps develop its own version of the Haas, and Ryo Hirakawa could enter the Japanese Grand Prix, and we'll see how he gets on. But if he beats a bunch of World Championship teams, he doesn't take points away from them in the World Championship, but his standings do count. And then when the World Championship isn't there, the F1 Asia Championship could be like what Super Formula is now, and they still have the same teams and same drivers, but they're just running to a common technical regulations, which, yes, it would increase the costs in Super Formula, but I think not by as much as people think.
I think it would also probably make a greater business case for engine manufacturers like Mercedes-Benz, Ferrari, Audi. To Audi doesn't yet have any customer teams, but the more if you're
Yeah.
Mercedes and you develop that engine and you can now run it in multiple series around the world, you're now getting that much more data, that much more use, that much more economies of scale in
Well,
development.
you mentioned Ulrich Beretsky,
Right.
and this really plays back to something that he invented called the global race engine. Now, the global race engine concept is kind of forgotten now, but it really did work very well.
Mm-hmm.
And he came up with this basically set of technical regulations for engines. You could either develop your own engine from scratch, a purebred racing engine, or adapt a production car engine. They'd all be 4 cylinders, and they'd have a 1.6 litre turbocharged capacity. They didn't have to be turbocharged depending on the series, but they were all direct injection as well. And these 1.6 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engines were announced as actually being the new Formula One engine for the 2013 season. But they were also the engine for the World Touring Car Championship, the World Rally Championship. DTM and Super GT basically adopted the regulations, but at a 2-litre capacity. IndyCar was very seriously considering adopting that engine format. So that's why it's called the global race engine. And so everybody had a variant of those engines. And the idea was that when the F1 engines or the WRC engines had reached the end of their normal racing life, those engines would be supplied by the manufacturers to an associated tuner. So Spice would do the Volkswagen engines, probably Audi engines as well. AMG would do the Mercedes engines. Toda Racing or someone like that would do the engines in Japan. Toms would do the Toyotas. And those engines, so for Formula 3, would have the same engine blocks, the same cylinder heads, but they wouldn't have the turbochargers. So the engines would be rebuilt, modified, but they wouldn't have to buy everything from scratch. They'd be using the second-hand F1 engines, essentially, in Formula 3. And touring cars would have a similar version. And those engines actually are still in use. They were used in the World Touring Car Championship for a long time. They are still in use in the WRC in slightly different form, but they're still running in WRC. Super GT500 uses a variant of the engine. And that 1.6 litre capacity might sound familiar because Formula One is still essentially running the global race engine to this day, even though the reason they're running a V6 was down to Audi. Audi said when the 4-cylinder was announced as the engine for Formula One, Audi said it was going to enter Formula One to build that engine. They actually built the first 4-cylinder F1 engine and got it running, and it was on the dyno. Beretsky was responsible. And they were developing a variant of it, which ended up becoming the 2-litre DTM engine. And that engine was pretty much ready to go into a car. And I'm not sure if they were going to start a team or buy into a team that by that point they already had a very close relationship with Sauber in Switzerland.
Right.
Sauber was already developing the Audi R18s and doing a lot of the manufacturing work. And at one point around that time, Audi was spending so much time in the Sauber wind tunnel that the Sauber F1 team couldn't get into their own wind tunnel because Audi had booked it. And their car were falling behind for that reason. And it was the same technical team that were responsible for the Audi Le Mans car that were the same technical team as the Sauber F1 car. So it was a close linkage. But then Audi, and I forget the reasons, it was probably financial or corporate nonsense, had a bit of a wobble and then decided not to commit to F1 for 2013. And there was this whole will they, won't they, will they, won't they. And in the end, Mercedes and Ferrari, and depending on who you speak to, it was Mercedes or Ferrari, who basically said, no, we've had enough of this. We want a V6 engine to stop Audi from coming in. It was only a 4-cylinder engine because Audi wanted a 4-cylinder. And with Audi coming in, we changed the regulations to suit them. But actually, if there's no Audi, well, Ferrari don't make a 4-cylinder engine, but they do make a V6. Mercedes wanted to promote V6s and their bigger capacity engines, and all the other manufacturers were like, well, we don't care, we make both. Like Renault, like, well, we make V6s and 4-cylinders. Right. It doesn't matter to us. So even though Audi and Ferrari by that point had already got tested and running 4-cylinders, they changed the rules to a V6, 1.6 litre V6, and all the other bits of the rules were the same. And that meant that Audi couldn't jump back in. And that's why we have the slightly odd situation of a 1.6 litre V6 engine in F1 to this day. But it's all Ulrich Beretsky's fault, ultimately.
Is he still? I would have to imagine he's retired by now.
He's retired. Yeah, he's definitely retired. He still turns up at conferences, I think, occasionally.
Does he?
Tells everybody they're wrong, which is usually right about.
Legendary engineer. Yeah.
Absolutely. Very nice bloke as well.
Right. Yeah. I caught an interview with him not recently, it was probably a year or two ago now, where it was like he was talking about the idea of electric production cars, right? And
yeah, he's not happy about that, is he?
No. Well, he was talking about the way a lot of his reservations about it were about charging, and
yep.
He's like, with this rapid charging that everybody expects, you get the idea. So.
He actually said to me once, and he was absolutely right. I was doing some work outside of my media work. What a lot of people don't know, and I keep on the download a little bit, is I do some technical consulting for bigger companies and projects, which can't really talk about many of them, but some of them you've seen on track, some of them you haven't. Some of them involve different sort of vehicles and stuff like that, and stuff that goes very fast. One of the things I was looking at was electric mobility, and one of the case studies was a manufacturer wanted to do a bit more electric mobility, electric cars, maybe electric bikes, something like that. And it was looking at the battery technologies. That was fascinating, the emerging battery technologies, where we are, but also the life cycle, the life of the battery, which is improving. The technology is constantly improving. But the biggest roadblock, you had all sorts of difficult things like rare earth elements in the batteries having to, it's a bit like blood diamonds. You had to rely on cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I mean, if blood diamonds unacceptable, well, what about the battery in your Tesla? Is that acceptable? You have to think about all of those questions. But also the biggest factor was the actual energy infrastructure. There's always people talking about charging, how you charge the batteries. There's multiple ways you can charge a battery. Ultimately, you need a nuclear power station, fossil fueled power station, or some sort of hydroelectric, geothermal, or big old solar panel somewhere in a desert. That's all achievable, particularly if you settle down the Middle East and you can cover the desert with big solar panels. That's really quite a good solution, but doesn't look likely anytime soon. The thing that people, I think in the UK, it's a really good case study. Now, the UK is not a very big nation, but it's quite slow to travel around, even though we drive a lot quicker than you do in the States. It's a weird thing, but we just go faster and get there slower.
Yeah. No.
If I was to go drive from where I am here, just outside London, to Glasgow in Scotland, it's probably a 5-6 hour drive. Now, in my car, my Golf, I can't quite comfortably make that journey on a tank of fuel. I can just about do it, but maybe not quite. It depends how long I take and how fast I drive.
Right.
So probably can't quite comfortably do it. Certainly if I got to Glasgow, I'd be quite low on fuel and need to refuel pretty quickly. But if you refuel halfway along, now for me, that's a nothing. Is pull into the service station, fill it up, off you go. 2-3 minutes tops. Doesn't really, you spend more time walking in to pay at the till than you do get back on the road. If you do that with an electric car, now I know you've got fast chargers now popping up at the service areas and stuff like that, but you've got to think about charging an electric car. Think of electricity as like water going through a pipe. Now, if you're charging slowly, you only need a very small pipe with a slow flow rate of water in, like a garden hose or something like that. Nothing too serious, but it takes a long time to fill that tank. So if you imagine it's a water tank, and you're filling it with a garden hose, it'll take a while to fill up. And that might take you 15-20 minutes, or maybe longer to fill it up. And that's still quite quick. But if you want to fill up in the 5 minutes, well, you need a really big garden hose. And that's high current, high energy, high flow rate through that big pipe that's got to go. And that pipe doesn't just go to the charging thing you see by the side of the road, because they're all full of batteries to be able to get the charging rates. So if more and more people go to electric, that you're going to have to get more and more of these chargers with more and more batteries in.
Right.
But ultimately, it's like a network of water, because at some point, you're going to have to put a big old pipe in the ground between where the chargers are and where the power station is. And that can be hundreds of miles. So start thinking about the infrastructure costs, the engineering required, and the planning issues required to put this giant electrical cabling under the ground to all of these service stations all over the countryside. And that's just in the UK, a small country. Start thinking about doing it in the States. Look up where your nearest power station is. is probably not very nearby, unless you live somewhere like 3 Mile Island.
I actually do.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. No, I was like 8 miles downwind when it went.
That explains a lot.
Yeah, well, probably so. Yeah, my mom said she put me on the school bus that morning, and she was walking back to the house, and she smelled iodine in the air.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, and then I guess we
Or I should
left.
say, not great, not terrible.
No. Well, we're all still here.
Yeah, exactly.
So she's still in great health in her 80s now. But no, the other thing, I guess they had air monitoring. The military showed up that week. We had gone to Pittsburgh, and my dad stayed back because he had to work. And it was weird. He said there was military in our neighborhood, and very, very, Stranger Things kind of situation.
I mean, okay, if you do live near a nuclear power station, then I'm sure it's perfectly safe. I mean, an RBMK reactor doesn't just go pop. But the problem is it's that sheer. I mean, look at Texas. Texas is a great example.
Right.
If you start thinking the coast of Texas is where you want to put a nuclear power station, though I know some people build them on rivers, or even gas-fired or coal-fired power stations. Think how far it has to be away before people start complaining. So a coal-fired power station, lots of bad pollution. So you don't want to build it next to a big city. So that's got to be far away. But then you need the cables to go into the big city. But the big city is sort of big city. Streetcars, buildings, all of those demands, which all still need to be met. And this is the problem with electric vehicles. If everybody switched to electric vehicles tomorrow, it would be an environmental catastrophe.
Right.
And that's just a fact. So this is why I think the future of, and I will come back to motor racing on this, the future of motor racing, and this is very much something that Beretsky kind of indoctrinated me into, but I fully agree because the facts stack up. It's a mix of fuels. There isn't one single solution. So electric cars do serve a purpose. Electric vehicles absolutely do serve a purpose. But when you start getting into longer range travel, the usage case, really depletes quite quickly.
Sure.
And you have to look at the power and the energy infrastructure, how that's actually happening. And you need to look at the whole picture because electric vehicles are heavier. They cause more damage to the roads as a result. There's more tire wear from an electric vehicle because of that extra weight, which causes problems with localized particular issues. So all that tire wear, that all goes somewhere, that brake wear, it all goes somewhere into the environment around you. And that people are just starting to pick up on that. Right. So I'm not saying electric vehicles are the great evil. They're not, but still a lot of work to be done on reducing their weight, increasing their range, making them more crashable, more reliable, and longer life. I can go back 100 years, get a car, and probably make it work without great difficulty. You're not going to be able to get a Tesla in 100 years to work. It's just, you're going to have to rebuild the whole thing. It ain't going to work.
That is really there's so much of that in modern car production. I mean, I'd love to get back to F1, but
I'm going to come back to F1. I was getting there.
Yeah, well, no, modern cars are so not serviceable, right? By simple, I have a friend who has in the US, Volkswagen makes a large SUV called the Atlas in their Chattanooga plant. MQB based, but quite large 7-passenger. And he's got like 100,000+ miles on it. VR6 car. The VR6 is serviceable, but a headlight just went out, right? An LED headlight, and there's no way to replace the bulb. You're replacing the entire unit. Yeah. And it's just not really. And the cars seem to get more and more that way. My wife does have an e-tron and like the SUV, and I look at it and it's an interesting, fascinating thing. But in 20 years from now, will it even, be showing up at classic car events because people won't even have the software to make it work?
Well, the reason it won't be is you won't have the fuel for it at the moment, unless F1 succeeds on what it's trying to do at the moment. And it is doing something really amazing. Nobody's talking about it, and it's really frustrating for me.
Yeah, so that's cliffhanger. I'm going to put a pin in it right there, not to end it, but to make that the end of part 1. Part 2 will be more about Formula One. Sam and I went for 2 hours, 35 minutes. It's so wonderful to be able to catch up with him, but that's a bit long for an episode. So for that reason, I'm going to make it 2. So sorry for the cliffhanger, but not sorry. Look for more Formula One talk in the next episode, which will drop imminently.
The Four Rings, If You Know, You Know podcast is part of the Weekly Driver podcast series. For more news and features about Audi, visit the Four Rings If You Know, You Know website at 4OOOIYKYK.com. That's 4OOIYKYK.com. There you can also subscribe to the Four Rings If You Know You Know Substack newsletter that will keep the latest Audi news and features coming straight to your inbox. Four Rings If You Know You Know is an independent production and not affiliated with the Audi brand. If you know, you know.